Hello everyone and welcome back to Sendix Weather channel, where today we will be looking at the latest from the model output to see what everything is showing. It's kind of like a bumper video today. We're going to be looking at a lot of different things. We're going to look at the strat data, we're going to have a look at the weather for the next 2 weeks, we'll look at the weather for tomorrow because it looks pretty bad with the rain. There's obviously some warnings being issued, and we'll have a look at some longer range stuff as well, because things are certainly looking interesting in the longer term. But of course, let's focus on the current term. So we're going to start by looking at the latest GFS. It's not fully out and I'm not going to be able to do a video later on because I am going out tonight, but we can have a look at what it's up to now, which it's far enough out anyway. Anything beyond day 10 is completely uncertain at the moment at this time frame anyway, so it's not really worth looking at. But at the moment we've got higher pressure going up towards Greenland. We've got an area of low pressure out in the Atlantic trying to push up from the southwest. So as you can see, we're moving through, and tomorrow it is a very, very wet and windy day, and I'll show you that in a little bit. It's a very wet and windy day. Got an area of low pressure pushing up from the southwest into the UK, the south of the UK. We've got some very big rainfall totals. We've got yellow, widespread yellow, and also some amber warnings being issued by the UK Met, which suggests that there's going to be some quite big rainfall totals, upwards of 80 millimeters, maybe more in some isolated spots. But yeah, it could be some isolated risk with that as well. But moving on and looking into the weekend, things do dry out as higher pressure builds through the country and out to the west of the UK, and winds turn into more of a northwestern northerly by the early part of next week. So you can see colder air beginning to sink in from the north. Now, it's pretty dry through the first couple of days of this, so 17th and 18th of November are looking pretty dry, but quite cold, so maybe some night frosts and maybe a few patchy snow showers in the north, of course. But by Tuesday and Wednesday next week, you can see little troughs, little areas of low pressure pushing in, so you can see there a little kink in the isobars. On Wednesday the 19th, that could be a little snowmaker. But you've got to remember that the air masses for the time of year are cold, but they're nothing too remarkable, so any snow will be quite marginal. So areas like the south and southeast are probably less at risk from seeing winteriness. It'd probably be most likely rainfall than snowfall, and the showers won't be that widespread. There might be a few around, but I wouldn't expect too much, not at this stage anyway. If there are any little features and little troughs and things, I'll keep you updated on it, but at the moment it doesn't look too likely. Now, going into after that range, lower pressure begins to break through from the west and just bring in the cold air again very briefly before higher pressure is ridging back into the country and to the south. Higher pressure sinks to the south, lower pressures away to the north, and with this GFS run, winds are in from a very mild southwesterly wind, and that's by the 26th of November turning very mild. Comparing that, oh dearie me, cut that out, editor. Comparing that to the comparing that to the GM run, the Canadian model, you can see again that area of low pressure pushing up from the southwest, going to bring that really heavy rainfall to parts through tomorrow. And then we've got higher pressure again retrogressing in the Atlantic up towards Greenland, and then the colder areas around Monday, moving through the UK, and then by Tuesday we're all into a pretty cold northerly flow. Again, a few showers possible, maybe a little feature there for the south, possibly on this GEM run. Of course, devil's in the detail. Now this is interesting actually, this is way different. You can see higher pressure beginning to already ridge out in the Atlantic. Lower pressure is sliding through the country, but that's on a northwest-southeast alignment, so that's going to slide into Eastern Europe. And behind that, it could turn colder again with winds in from the north. You can see some quite cold air located to the north and northeast of the UK, so maybe one to watch on that one. I have to wait and see on the developments on that. But then looking at the AI model, the ECM artificial intelligence model, to see what the 6th edit run is showing, you can see higher pressure again building out up towards Greenland, bringing down that colder northerly wind through the other part of next week. An area of low pressure develops in the flow by the 20th, so there could be quite a big snow event there for the north and northwest, with that low pressure system wrapping around the country, higher pressure in the North Atlantic and bringing down still a cold northerly wind. This is the sort of thing that can develop at short notice, but that would bring quite a widespread snow event to northwestern Britain there. Can see very marginal there. Probably northern Scotland and the Scottish mountains seeing most of that, but you can see as it clears out into the Atlantic, we go back into a cold northerly wind for all very briefly before higher pressure is sinking back to the south. Lower pressure to the north does bring in some brief northerly shots, but of course they are very short-lived. But one thing to note is the jet stream is sinking southwards. It's actually going into parts of France, Italy, and it's going well to the south of the UK. So we are more likely to see colder incursions from the north or northwest with this sort of pattern. So this run is obviously milder than this next week coming up. But you can see by the second to final week of November, it is fresher. It's not obviously cold, but it is fresher. Then it certainly has been of late, because we're bringing in more of a west-northwesterly airflow than a southwesterly airflow that we've seen as of recent weeks. So even when we get that change from the colder weather to the milder weather, it's not going to be anything too remarkable. It's just going to be around average at most, really, maybe slightly above at times. But I wouldn't expect that southwesterly flow to really dominate for too long, especially if these models are anything to go by. Now, of course, we can have a look at the diagrams, which we will do. So we're going to go to London today and see what that's showing. Of course, it's updating at the moment. You can see, we'll have a look at the 6Z in a minute, but the latest 12Z is well supportive of runs going down to -5, the threshold for cold air, arriving to the UK by around the 17th of November, and it looks to stay that way, really, until around the 21st, 22nd, when it might turn milder again, but there's a little bit of uncertainty on the exact transition that we might see. Of course, we could see low pressure pushing in from off the Atlantic, overriding that high pressure in the Atlantic, and low pressure toppling it away, and we could see a bit of a transitional snow event, but of course that's a long way off and very uncertain. But you can see turning colder, temperatures probably maximums of 7 to 8 degrees in the south, colder as you head north, with some wintry showers, particularly in the north and east. Little features might turn up at short notice as well. But if you have a look at the 6Z run, for a general overview, you can see colder conditions dominating between around the 17th and the 22nd of the month, before maybe returning towards average, but with some uncertainty. You can see some colder runs and some milder runs in the mix as well, the GFS 6Z being one of those. And the 12Z counterpart will also join it, because it brought up a mild southwesterly flow. So yeah, a lot of uncertainty on that. Moving on then to look at, well, I'll have a quick look at a snow run, because why not? You know, there's that wet weather moving up from the southwest. It's going to be very widespread for central northern Britain, into the south and south Midlands, into parts of Wales. Wales and the highest points could see some very big rainfall totals with this, upwards of 50 to 80 millimetres, and parts of southern Republic of Ireland as well. Quite widespread event, really, extending as far east as Suffolk. So we'll the devil's in the detail, but again, it's going to be very heavy. It does eventually weaken through Friday night into Saturday morning, and we go into a drier pattern because higher pressure is toppling through the UK. But you can see by Monday with this GFS run that colder air is sinking southwards, so you can see showers turn wintry over the northern hills. Obviously, places with slight elevation could see some as well. Parts of Northern Ireland. And the showers become a little bit more widespread with this GFS run. Other runs aren't as supportive, but again, you could see little features, little short waves developing at short notice, little troughs, little kinks in the isobars. They could develop little features. You can see bits of snow through the Midlands, southeastern England at times, and parts of Wales, the highest ground, and then it turns wetter and windier into the latter half of the run, what we can see so far. So definitely one to watch, but again, nothing too major going on. Having a look at the North Atlantic Oscillation next. Remember, if this is in a negative phase, which is below the zero line here, then that encourages blocking patterns to develop to the northwest of the UK and encourages northerly or northeasterly airflows. If it's in a positive phase, it encourages low pressure systems to be moving through the UK. Now, as you can see, we are in a negative phase, and we have been for the last few days to about a week, but you can see that's going to remain up to around the 21st of the month, and then these runs have a bit of deviation. There's some keeping us negative and some keeping us positive, but overall now we are favouring a positive NAO, which would encourage low pressure systems to move in from off the UK. So that is one to watch. It has flipped a lot in the recent days, but definitely is not a done deal yet, I'd say. We might see a temporary milder incursion, but I just can't see it lasting for that long, if you know what I mean. I feel like it'd only be a few days to maximum a week, but I think that colder weather will return into the final days of November, into the start of December, and you'll see why right now. Right then, so this is the latest GFS polar vortex run. I'm actually going to use the 6Z for parts of it because it's not fully updated yet, but it's updated as full as we need to really. But yeah, we're looking at the 12Z run, the midday run. So basically the blues here are the polar vortex at its roots, and the greens, oranges and reds are the warming's gathering paces. Because currently we've got quite a relatively average to slightly weak of an average vortex at the moment, about -80 at its roots. And as we go through, you can see some warming gathering pace over Siberia, but does dissipate quite quickly. You can see a minor warming trying to get going over Siberia, but doesn't really come to much. But if we look in the longer term, you can see that some warming does develop over Siberia. Not that strongly, to be honest, but it does develop. You can just see it off the chart. There's some warming developing over eastern Siberia, trying to push towards the polar vortex. Now, obviously, if it strengthens, so if it gets into the orange and red colours, then it could start to penetrate towards the polar vortex and try and displace it, or even split it, but it doesn't look like it's going to do it on this run. If you look at the previous 6Z, you can see the warming was much more significant and putting much more pressure on the polar vortex than this current run is showing. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty on this. There's been a lot of messing around with the model runs as to whether we will see a sudden stratospheric warming or whether we won't. But we'll have to see how things play out. Final two charts then. So we've got the ECM. This is the mean zonal wind predictions from the ECMWF subseasonal forecasts. So you can see that at the moment we have a weaker than average polar vortex at the moment. That's the record lowest year, I'm pretty sure. And as you can see, around the 24th to 25th of November, this thick blue line, which is really hard to make out, is the average line of all the runs within the ECM ensembles, showing the zonal winds at 10 HPA. And you can see if it reaches this 0 line, that is classed as a sudden stratospheric warming level. You can see it just about gets there. It's about 0, slightly above. But you can see there are quite a few runs going negative. Now, what can this do? I mentioned this in one of my previous videos. If you do see that getting down to 0, -1, or below, even for a few days, and it could last longer than a day, it doesn't always have to last just a day, it can last, a few days. This one looks to be a short-lived sudden stratospheric warming, but if it does, what can happen? Well, it can increase your chances of blocking later on. So it has a 2-week lag time from the stratosphere, 30 kilometers above the atmosphere, going down to the troposphere. And what we could see in terms of our weather patterns has a 2-week lag time. So if it happened on the 25th of November, we could expect impacts into the second week of December. So definitely one to watch. If it does happen, though, it could increase chances of colder weather. Doesn't always, but it can sometimes. This would be the earliest sudden stratospheric warming on record since around 1960 or 1968. I can't remember which year it was. Please let me know in the comments. But I know it was one of the 60s winters or autumns that had a record-breaking early sudden stratospheric warming. I just can't remember which year it was, but yeah, it was very early. So yeah, one to watch definitely. See how it develops over the coming days. But I would say the chance is quite likely of a sudden stratospheric warming, which really could have some impacts on the weather patterns through the early part of winter, as emphasised in my forecast. Go and watch it in the December forecast. Anyway, these are the final things I'm going to show. These are the weather regimes predicted by the ECMWF until the 26th of December, Boxing Day. So as you look at the moment, we have a negative NEO, which is why we've got that blocking to the northwest. And then you can see that we go into an Atlantic ridge phase, which is when we see the colder air sinking southwards over the next few days. That's going to stay around until around the 22nd, when you can see that there's more of a split between an Atlantic-driven flow, positive NEO, so low pressure to the south, low pressure to the north, high pressure to the south, and a westerly flow. That's the most favoured outcome. And then you've got a few going for an Atlantic ridge, so maintaining the blocking. But generally, it looks like it will turn more unsettled and mild, at least for a time. But as you'll see, this has been a big trend. Around that second week of December, there's a lot more reds appearing, and that's encouraging of blocking patterns to the north, northeast, or northwest that chance is quite similar to a Atlantic driven flow. So that suggests a lot of uncertainty in that second week of December. It could be a big talking point, this. And it is one to watch, because if we get a blocking patterns develop, low pressure systems shifted southwards, jet stream sinks into France and southern Spain, then you could see colder incursions from the north-northeast, and it could be very cold with the polar air sat just to the north and northeast. It could actually be quite cold and possibly snowy, but of course that's surmising. But it's one to watch how that develops over the next few days and weeks, because it has done a lot of chopping and changing. A few days ago, it was favouring that blocking developing, but now it's not as a strong signal. But we'll have to see how it develops. So yeah, bit of a longer update from me. If you did find it informative, then consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. I do appreciate your continued support. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. And don't forget, I'm doing a live stream on Saturday at 7 PM, so be sure to tune into that. Bye, everyone.